Major support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. The South Carolina Ports Authority, a major economic driver in South Carolina, supporting 187,000 jobs and nearly $53 billion in annual economic activity. And Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
So with fall activities fast approaching, our calendars now are pretty populated by increasing commitments, family things, business things, and we begin to get that end-of-year stride going into the holidays. Welcome again to the most widely watched source of Carolina business policy and public affairs, seen for 28 years now across the Carolinas. As the menace of midterm election rhetoric approaches, the health care cost debate will no doubt be key issue again. Joining us later is Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina Chief Dr. Patrick Conway. And in a moment, we start with resident thought leaders Jonathan Kappler of NC Free and Carl Blackstone from Columbia's Chamber of Commerce.
Gratefully acknowledging support by Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, an independent licensee of the Blue Cross and Blue Shield Association. Visit us at southcarolinablues.com. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. BARINGS, a leading global asset management firm dedicated to meeting the evolving investment and capital needs of its clients. Learn more at barings.com.
On this edition of Carolina Business Review, Jonathan Kappler, North Carolina Free Enterprise Foundation, Carl Blackstone from the Columbia Chamber of Commerce, and special guest Patrick Conway, President and CEO of Blue Cross Blue Shield, North Carolina.
Welcome back to our program. Gentlemen, thanks for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
So, Jonathan, we talk about midterm elections. We talk about elections this fall. Do you get the sense that most voters know what's at stake in these midterm elections? And in your case, and in our case here, we're talking about the Carolinas, in North Carolina specifically?
Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of you broadly get a sense that they know that it's an important and consequential election nationally. But as it relates to really what's at stake in terms of the issues and the direction of the state of North Carolina, I'm not so sure voters are kind of there yet. Now, we are kind of within the last 2 months of the campaign. Most of the money being spent on these elections is going to happen now, and so voters may tune in. But we're really only talking about 40% or so of the voters are really even going to turn out in North Carolina this election. So, there's been polling indicating that the constitutional amendments that are on the ballot this year, that voters are still not really sure that there are even constitutional amendments on the ballot. So voters aren't quite there yet.
So there are 6 constitutional amendments.
Right.
That is a seismic change for North Carolina to go to the public with the kind of idea of changing the DNA of whatever North Carolina's Constitution is?
Yeah, it really is. And in North Carolina, we don't do this very frequently. We've had, I think, over the past kind of 40 to 50 years, maybe 40 overall constitutional amendments proposed. Most of them tend to pass, but a chunk of 6 of them at once, a mix of kind of feel good and some really significant policy changes for North Carolina, I think is unusual. And it came about late in the process. I mean, these were put on the ballot in the summer, and there's been a lot of uncertainty around them because of litigation between the governor and the General Assembly. And we just now, 2 months out, have certainty about what they even really look like on the ballot. So a lot's going on there.
You're nodding as if you agree with the idea that where did constitutional amendments come from?
Well, it's kind of crazy. I mean, obviously, the Constitution is meant to be a doctrine that is pretty consistent. Having 6 amendments at one time, that's a lot. We'll have 1 or 2 every few years. Like we have one this year on whether or not to allow the superintendent of education to be appointed position instead of an elected official. And so that's our only one. So 6 is a lot. You know,
speaking of South Carolina, it doesn't seem like, and this is just my observation, Carl, it doesn't seem like there is the loss of power at risk in the fall elections, at least Republican versus Democrat in South Carolina. But there is this sense that David Pascal, special prosecutor in South Carolina, that's been named to chase down the ethics issue that have gone, or the lack of ethics that have gone on in the State House. He is pushing now for the grand jury report to be made public, and he would like that prior to the election. How would you handicap that this thing is going to be seen by the public, and what changes do you think will follow any kind of reporting?
I think the Pasco investigation is 4 years in the making right now. I think at some point the grand jury investigation will become public. There's two outstanding trials left. So I think it'll be hard to release those documents before the Justice Department finishes their case. So once those are done, I think the documents will be released. Mm-hmm. The impact on those, I think it's been 4 years. Everybody's pretty aware of what the case is. I think there'll be some ethics reforms in place next spring that will probably carry on to the next year to really encompass what type of corporate ethics reform may be needed.
So you think the feet of the corporate community are going to be held to the fire just as much as any serving member in the State House?
I do. But it's a perception issue, right? I mean, whether it was a very small percentage of companies, there's no evidence of wrongdoing by those companies, but I do think they'll tighten the reins up a little bit.
You know, Jonathan, Carl was talking a little bit about, obviously had mentioned that the constitutional amendments that before the voters in the fall is going to be to figure out what they're going to do with the superintendent of education in South Carolina. When you talk about North Carolina education, a recent report showed that graduation rates aren't as good as they've been. Read to Achieve third grade reading is not as good as it's been. This clearly flies in the face of what the efforts in North Carolina have been. Is education in North Carolina, I don't want to call it a crisis, but it's not going in the direction that many people thought. I mean, take the teacher pay out of it. Yeah. Still, the DNA of what education in North Carolina means. How much at risk does this put the state in terms of national and global stage? Yeah,
well, I mean, from the business community's perspective, education infrastructure and actual physical infrastructure are just foundational, right, for the future. And there's been a lot more focus on a workforce and making sure that we have the workforce that we need. And so much of our business community is relying on highly educated employees. And so what it feels like right now is that we're searching we've got an accountability framework so that we are able to kind of measure some of these things for the first time in really robust ways. And it's a question of who's really leading the ship here and where is that strategic direction. I think we're still kind of fighting over that.
Is there any surprise that new superintendent, I say new, relatively new Mark Johnson and Bill Colby and the board are still at loggerheads about how to run this thing?
It almost feels like the North Carolina way at this point is to fight between the State Board of Education and the Superintendent of Public Instruction. There's a lot of synergy there, but at the same time, we really do need to kind of have clear voices on this, and we don't quite have that quite yet.
You know, as good as this economy is, Carl, I want to come back to Columbia and the Midlands specifically. You've got a group down there of which you're right in the middle of, Midland Business Leaders Group, MBLG, right. And it encompasses all of the leadership, corporate leadership among NGOs and corporations about how to take Columbia, and I don't mean to be telling you your business, but how to take Columbia and the region and the Midlands and this is my term, to catch up with the growth in Greenville, the growth in Charleston, Charlotte, Raleigh, Durham. And they are also at a bit of loggerheads about how to proceed forward. Yeah. Who wins that argument, and what does it look like at the end of the day?
Columbia wins that argument at the end of the day. What the conversation that we're having is talking about how to make Columbia a better place. We all have a vision of making it more competitive. So at the end of the day, whether one plan wins out, we're going to be more competitive as a region.
And not to look for sensational headlines, I'm not, but I think I was struck, and I want to ask you this question. Are you at all surprised by the varying opinions? Not just kind of the same side, just a different take, but some of them are polar opposites on how they want to go forward.
It is, and so you've got a change in the guard as well. But if you look around our peer cities, you look both directions, they're outpacing us. And so we've got to have a SWOT analysis at some point to say, what do we need to do differently to be competitive? The growth is coming. Charlotte, Greenville, Charleston are all migrating closer to Columbia, but we need to be competitive. Our tax structure needs to be worked on. So it's really, there's no silver bullet. I think it's going to take 2 or 3 different approaches. One, we've got to change the structure, how we recruit and what type of industries we go after. Our workforce is a big issue right now in taxes. And so the cost of doing business is a little higher in our capital city. So it's going to take every idea, it needs to be vetted, but to answer your question directly, because there's no single issue that needs to be fixed, there are multiple issues, everybody's going to have a influence on what changes.
Are you closer to a solution? Well, of course you would be, but are you closer to a solution now than you were 6 months ago?
Absolutely. I think there's concessions being made now. We're going to do a deep dive and look at how we grow the business climate. And it's a much needed conversation. So, but again, it's taking everybody sitting around a table and hashing it out.
Yeah.
Sometimes it takes that level of engagement to come up with a solution.
Okay, thank you. Stay with us, please. We're going to meet our guest in just a moment. Next week on this program, there is a packaging and paper manufacturer called DOMTAR in the upstate of South Carolina. Canadian-owned but headquartered in South Carolina. His name is John Williams. John is the CEO, president and CEO. He's been on this program before. He joins us again. And then also the new Richmond Federal Reserve president. It may be in Richmond, but clearly the influence is in North and South Carolina. Thomas Barkin will join us on this program to talk about the Fed's influence, not just nationally, but right here in the Carolinas. Other trends and tabloid-type headlines have dominated for a while, but healthcare costs, delivery, and deployment are still among the chief issues that vex personal and corporate balance sheets. An organization with substantial power in the retail cost of healthcare and services is one of the Blues, North Carolina's Blue. We are joined now by Dr. Patrick Conway, Chief Executive Officer of Blue Cross Blue Shield of North Carolina. Dr. Conway, welcome to the program.
It's great to be here.
Gosh, where do we start with healthcare, Dr. Conway? Let me start with a specific. North Carolina State Treasurer Dale Falwell is not your typical retiring state treasurer. He's an accountant with a creative way of looking things. He fired off, that's my term, Dr. Conway, he fired off a request to UNC Health to say, I want to see what your cost of delivery of this health care product that you are delivering to the employees of the state of North Carolina that we, meaning the state treasurer, is responsible for. A question springs out of that, and I want to ask you, how do hospitals have a pretty good sense of the delivery of these health care costs? And is it most of the hospitals, is it a few of the hospitals? How do you see that?
Yeah, so traditionally, and I've worked in hospital settings, hospitals focus on and know their overall cost structure, and they know their revenue. But revenue traditionally has been paid for volume, so you pay for each admission to the hospital. And chief financial officers literally use terms like heads in beds. More heads in beds, more revenue. I work in the hospital. There's no patient or family that ever wants to be that head in that bed. They want to go home. They want to stay home, be healthy as long as possible. So what we're doing is we're shifting payments for value. So paying for better health outcomes and a lower cost, incentivizing hospitals, health systems, doctors to keep people healthy, keep them out of the hospital, and know their cost structure for whole populations of patients.
So can you, and I'm sorry to interrupt you. Can you leverage your relationship as a payer to let's say UNC Health to say, no, we really want for you to know and you to deliver to us what your cost to deliver this particular service to this patient is?
Yeah, we can and we have. So as you said, I hear from employers, families across the state, they want the cost of healthcare to go down. We've said publicly we want to push the healthcare cost as low as possible. So for example, in the individual market, we set up a competition between health systems. We were able to bring down premiums for the first time in North Carolina history in the individual market. Some areas 20%, on average 4%. And that was about shifting hospitals and health systems to two-sided risk, where they're at risk for health outcomes at lower cost and getting a lower price for the services delivered in hospitals.
Jonathan?
Yeah, so I think it may be cliche at this point, but we're really in an evolutionary kind of period in healthcare, right? I mean, it's up and down. Sometimes you don't know what direction you're heading in. And perhaps this is more of a leadership question than it really is kind of a health policy question. But how do you kind of set a strategic direction in an environment like this where the policy framework is kind of unsettled?
Yeah, I mean, on the policy framework, and I've worked in D.C., we said this year when our premiums were -4 in the individual market, if you had stability in the market, they would have been -20 plus on average. So there was about 18 points due to instability in the market. So I do think government has a role to providing stability in markets and allowing competition to work. We have a lot of payer competition in North Carolina. We like that. We like it when there's provider competition. And really what we're focused on is how to get better health outcomes at a lower cost and a great experience for patients and families.
As a follow-up to that, Patrick, I don't want to sound sensational, but is instability and uncertainty around healthcare policy and health delivery, is that the natural state and not having some kind of opportunity to look out 5 or 10 years?
Yeah, I think some amount of political instability right now is the reality. I think despite that, though, we're focused on the long term. I will say, literally was talking to a hospital CEO this morning before the show. Yeah. Talked about how we want a 5-year contract that we all agree on where we're jointly accountable for quality, total cost of care, and experience, and that we deliver on better health outcomes, better experience at a lower cost for the people we serve. We also insure the majority of people in North Carolina. We're a not-for-profit. We are taxable. We pay about $500 million in taxes. Yeah. It allows us to really focus on people in North Carolina for the long term.
Mm-hmm. Doctor, we're looking at the Affordable Care Act in its inception, where it is today. Are we achieving the goals, overarching goals of what the Affordable Care Act was supposed to do, where obviously adjustments need to be made along the way? Are we closer to get to that point?
I think on the positive side, we have insured more people. There is good evidence that health insurance matters in terms of health outcomes, cost, and economic stability. I think on the negative side, the costs are going up too fast. So we have to get costs under control. I've said publicly, which sometimes makes our team nervous, we want all premiums across all lines of business never to be above a 5% increase. So less than 5% or negative. That is not the history of healthcare in America. Right.
Do you tweet that out in the middle of the night?
We have. I don't tweet in the middle of the night myself, although I do tweet now occasionally, but no, not in the middle of the night. Yeah.
I'm curious about what was attractive about this job in North Carolina, an opportunity maybe to make a difference in this. You were clearly in D.C. and had such a big megaphone there. I'm curious as to what was attractive about this.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked in provider systems in D.C. for 20 plus years on better healthcare outcomes, lower cost, great experience. I could have gone and back worked at a provider. I actually think a not-for-profit blue, and you have one in South Carolina and North Carolina, can drive major change in the state. I mean, we announced recently $2.6 million investment in food insecurity. North Carolina is one of the 10 hungriest states in the United States. We've got counties where 8 out of 10 children go hungry. And so we're investing in social determinants of health. We're a very mission-driven organization, and I think we can literally be a model for the nation in terms of what's possible in terms of better health outcomes and lower costs.
And I think this is an important point in the business community. In an increasingly kind of a chaotic political environment in which we live in, the business community sometimes can be that stabilizing force and really drive home some of these strategic things that are in everybody's best interest.
Yeah, I will say I agree, and I'll challenge the business community that this, in my opinion, should be a CEO level issue, given the cost structure. Meaning, if we're driving for value, that at times will cause disruption, where we say we're going to cut out this provider that's low value or high cost. And we need the business community to partner with us on that.
Well, on that end, you've got a number of businesses that are actually bringing healthcare on site and adding caregivers in a work environment, so you don't have the absenteeism and you don't have an hour to go to sit and wait in the doctor's office. You see that continuing telemedicine, those type of things that businesses can provide.
Yeah, we will work with businesses for on-site care. We're expanding our telehealth offering. So how do you have virtual care so people don't have to go to an office visit? We're investing in mental and behavioral health, including telehealth, primary care that's both 24/7 access and telehealth. So it's a system of care around patients, families, the people, the employees of businesses that supports them.
Do you think all the hype, and I call it hype, but do you think when Amazon, JP Morgan, and Berkshire Hathaway all got together and said, we're going to do something about this, are they going to be able to bring down cost more than any large organization has been able to do it in a meaningful way?
Yeah, and I've talked to some of the leaders of all those organizations, and the CEO at Atul Gawande I've known for 20 years. They've got about 1 million people spread across the U.S. We have 4 million plus in North Carolina.
Right.
But what we should listen to is they're angry, and there's employers that are angry that the costs are too high, the quality's not good enough, and the experience isn't good enough. And so what we talk about with our team is how do we partner with providers so we improve health outcomes, we lower costs. We haven't talked about consumer transparency yet today. We just rolled out something called Smart Shopper. It literally is as simple as if you are buying an MRI in healthcare, it can be 200 to 300% more, one place as opposed to another. And on your iPhone, and whether you call us, whatever modality, we tell people, you go here, we're not going to give you anything. You go to this lower cost place, we will write you a check for $400. By the way, the return is greater than 5 to 1 because of the price differentials. And it's driving consumer behavior as well to improve quality and lower cost.
Enough to dramatically shift the cost of what healthcare will ultimately.
Yeah, and we're early in this pilot, but it has saved about $40 million to date. We're seeing big consumer uptake.
Year to date?
Yes, and it started this year, actually mid-year. So you're seeing decreases, and we had seen this, we had worked with some other payers on this, but it's driving behavior that the consumer, it's literally a check. They go get that MRI at the lower cost place, and the MRI is the same, and we cut them a check for $400.
Yeah, and maybe that actually leads into this question. Surprises, like pleasant surprises, not so pleasant surprises?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest pleasant surprise, one, have loved being in the Carolinas, just personally. And then two, we have a really mission-driven organization that wants to drive change. I went and shook hands with all 5,000 of our employees at their desk. Some of them work virtually, so we did a virtual handshake. But they want to drive change in North Carolina. It's their communities, their families. So we announced a $50 million investment in communities, things like housing, transportation, preventing abuse. I can't tell you how much that meant to our workforce. And I was, been at events recently to talk to people in the Carolinas, how much that means to them in terms of the long-term health of the people and communities in the Carolinas.
Cool.
In the foreseeable future, increased telemedicine, increased efficiencies, lowering the cost down. What else is out there in the technology realm that's going to change the way healthcare looks?
I'll give you one, and we aren't partnering with this company yet because we want to vet it more, but it blew my mind. Mental and behavioral health counseling, in person versus to a person via your iPhone versus avatar powered by artificial intelligence. Avatar powered by artificial intelligence, by far better outcomes, lower cost, and especially in the millennial age group, significantly preferred. They would rather talk to the avatar.
What's the risk?
Than a person. The risk, and the reason we need to vet it more is is the avatar fully trained? Will it pick up on serious things like potential for suicide, things like that? So, you always want to be careful with technology. You want to learn, implement, but you also want to make sure, especially in healthcare, that you're protecting the safety of the patients.
So how does provider consolidation change all of the DNA that you just talked about?
I'm glad you asked that. When there is only one hospital in the area, and that is true in parts of the Carolinas, that is not competition. It is a monopoly. And it means it's very hard to control costs. So I think as people that care about cost, we should worry when there's so much consolidation that there's essentially only one hospital. And you have places in North Carolina where you may have, not-for-profit hospitals being bought by for-profit that have a given market share. And that could create really challenging situations to control the costs.
So since you mentioned that, I think of Mission in Asheville in Western North Carolina now, the first major provider hospital that has gone to the for-profit. Are we going to see more of that?
I think you could see more of that. I'd say for the Asheville community, the employees and customers, which are the folks we think about, what we'd say is we're going to work incredibly hard to control the cost of care in that community, whether it's Mission or HCA. And we'll do that through a combination of prices, plus moving to these value-based arrangements. With providers, we have been very clear, we do not want to live in a fee-for-service world where we pay you for more admissions to the hospital. We want to live in a world where we pay you for preventing admissions, keeping people healthy, really working to coordinate care for people.
We've got less than a minute left, guys, and I've got to ask a quick follow-up question. It's fair to say that you have more than a casual relationship with Dr. Mandy Cohen from HHS in North Carolina and Bill Roper at UNC because of the connection through CMS in D.C. Does that help, and especially, and literally we've got 20 seconds, does that help with opioids and the opioid challenge?
It does. We're doing a lot of work with them on opioids. It also helps. I think we've got a group of people in North Carolina that want to change our health system and be a model for the
At a
nation.
DNA level?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay,
Collaboration matters. We got to do it together.
Well, Patrick, you've got great energy. People have said that about you. You follow Brad Wilson at Blue Cross Blue Shield, and you know the leverage you have, so you seem to be using it for good. We're glad to have you on the program. Please come back, and let's finish the dialogue. Carl, good to see you.
Likewise, thank you.
Good luck down in Columbia. Always nice to see you. And good luck in November. God bless you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jonathan. Good to see you. Thank you for watching our program. Until next week, I'm Chris William. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review provided by the Duke Endowment, BARINGS, Grant Thornton, the South Carolina Ports Authority, Sunoco, Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, and by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.com.